Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look.
Hi, I'm Dominique Samario, and it's an honor to be here with these four gentlemen to discuss a convention of states. As the daughter of a retired Marine Corps Sergeant Major, it really means a lot to discuss with these veterans why they believe in this convention of states. Growing up with my dad being in the military, he really instilled in me the values of believing in our country and believing in our country's values. So I'm very excited to discuss this convention of states with these veterans who are very supportive of it. And I'd love to learn more about the four of you and why you believe in having a convention of states. So thank you guys for being here and for joining us, and I'm really excited to learn more. So let's start with an old friend of mine, Ron Cuff. Tell me a little bit about your background, and particularly your background as a veteran.
Well, I'm a retired commander, Navy. I served as a flight instructor and had carrier experience out of the Philippines. Did 120 arrested landings, and fortunately I had the same number of launches, so evened out.
I like that.
That's always a good thing. And never saw combat, but certainly valued my experience as a military person, and continue to take that forward as I continue to try to serve my country. And that's really the basis for the Convention of States. We're all volunteers. We volunteered for the military, and we're volunteering to serve, to promote a Convention of States.
Perfect. And tell me, Clayton, Mr. Clayton Smith, thank you for being here as well. Tell me a little bit about your background, and then, like Ron did, you know, kind of leading into why you're passionate about Convention of States.
Right, yeah, I joined the United States Air Force back in 1990, and between the U.S. Air Force and the National Guard, I've served over 26 years, and was in Desert Storm. And like Ron, and these gentlemen, I've served my country for so long, and I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and that's the bottom line. Is I'm so concerned about where our country is after having served that long, and what the Constitution means, and so I just felt I had to get involved in some form or fashion, and so one thing led to another, and you know, in the military, I served in Air Force, intelligence and communications, and just a variety of things that I was able to do, and that time in service meant a lot to me. And once I saw things going the way they have been, I saw the Convention of States. I realized that elections were not enough, and I just realized that this constitutional solution was most likely the only answer that's left. And so after becoming the state director and bringing these gentlemen on as district captains, I was just, you know, really means a lot to me to serve with other veterans to push this cause.
That's perfect. I'm excited to learn a lot more from you, that's for sure.
I'm confused by Air Force intelligence, though.
Oh. It's an oxymoron.
I'm really excited for military jab number one. All right. Yeah. Fred, Mr. Fred here, tell me about your background.
Well, I started out November 21st, 1966. At that particular time, there was a draft and there was a regular Army. I was going to get drafted because I dropped out of college, so I enlisted. RA 169-32532, that's regular Army. I thought I was going to Vietnam because all of my cohorts did. The military does everything alphabetical. I'm Yerrick. Wilson and Yerrick went the opposite direction. We went to Korea, and the rest of my group, 48 of them or 46, went to Vietnam. So my first assignment was in Korea. I've worked all different, from Signal Corps, transportation, engineer, drill sergeant, recruiter, first sergeant, and command sergeant major. And in that period of time, I have some really, they said limit it to 100 words. I don't know how to do that. So I'll just stop by saying I happened to be in Berlin when Reagan was on the West saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," I had my wife and my father-in-law who served in World War II and mother-in-law on the East. I was in uniform. The Russians watch you. We spent the whole day. We didn't realize we had the same weekend. When we came out, there was 10,000 protesters in Berlin. But our president had said, and it came to fruition, tear down this wall. I support, serve, and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's why I'm among men like these.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. Thank you for sharing your stories. And I'd love to hear Jerry Hinton.
Jerry Hinton.
Tell me your story.
Yes, I was commissioned ROTC second lieutenant out of UC Berkeley and served 20 years. Seven of them as a aircraft commanders, B-47 bombers, sat on the end of the runway for a few years, just in case the Russians decided to get more active than usual. I gave up flying for missiles, so I served in the Minuteman missile program for 7 years and sat underground. Instead of flying, I was underground. I retired in 1975, went into civilian work. My reason for becoming active in this group is I am a historian. I know a little bit about what's gone on in the past, and I see the future not too good if we keep on the path we're going. I just see a downward spiral till it's not good. I try talking to my kids, grandkids, and I have a great-grandson now. When I try to bring up some of the problems I see that they're going to face, I didn't think I would, but maybe I'll be right there with them. Their eyes just sort of glaze over. So I think this is a chance, I think this is probably the only chance I have is trying to do something that will help them out. Regardless of what they do, this is something that we can actively do, get the Constitution amended and get the federal government under control and return sovereignty to the people and to the states where it belongs.
I think what you just finished with is a really good, succinct explanation of what a convention of states is. But to be honest, when I was discussing this show with Ron, I had never personally heard of a convention of states. And so I did a little bit of research, and maybe I'll ask Clayton, if you were to describe to somebody, because I mean, essentially anybody who's watching, you're talking to them, what would you tell them a convention of states is? Right.
Well, Article 5 of the Constitution provides two methods by which to propose amendments to our Constitution. And then regardless of what method is used, the states must ratify. 3/4 of the states have to ratify. So the first method is Congress can propose amendments from the federal level. And the second method, which is what we are now pursuing, which has never been accomplished yet in our country's history, is where the states, 2/3 of the states must apply using the same application for a convention of the states, so that they can basically bypass the entire federal government, bypass Congress, and they can hold their own convention and propose amendments on behalf of the people and behalf of the states. That's what we are pursuing, to rein in the federal government. And the founders actually did that because they inserted that second option so that the states could bypass the federal government if it ever became out of control. And they predicted that from the beginning at the Constitutional Convention. That's why we're doing it now.
Right, so like you're saying, the most common way, and the way that it's always been done in the past, would be that Congress would bring up possible amendments, and then they would vote. And the states always have to vote, right?
Correct.
27 amendments we've had in the history of the country, but none of them have come from the people.
None of them had come from the states, and that's what you guys are trying to bring the states together in order to back this convention, essentially.
We need 34 states to request the convention. And what's ironic to me is that, listening to Clayton, that we were all government employees at one time.
Right.
Federal government employees, and we're asking to rein in the federal government. So we know a little bit about how the federal government operates. And So that's an interesting point to think about.
Could you talk about kind of what is the problem? Because you guys have all touched on that you're very, very passionate because you see that there are real challenges right now. And I mean, I'm assuming anybody living in the country, anyone living anywhere, we all have some, you know, issues that we might be facing in our lives and, you know, challenges that the government is facing. But what do you guys see? If you were to define the problem, what would
one
you?
is staring us in the face is debt. You know, we have $19 trillion debt that we know about, hidden unfunded debt, maybe $120 trillion. And trillion is beyond my understanding, but you know, the government right now is spending about 50% of our gross domestic product. In other words, they're spending half of what we all make, and that's not going to last much longer because we had the example of Greece, and they can't print money. We can, and that's going to come to an end also. So it's a dangerous time. Besides, we have professional politicians. We have these politicians being elected, serving for a period of time. You can't get them out because it's so difficult, incumbency, and they come out millionaires. They make it a living, and our founding fathers never intended for the government to be run by professional politicians. They were supposed to come, serve, do the duty for the country and the people, and then move on. And we don't have that anymore. I call it, we have the kingdom of, excuse me, the kingdom of Washington, D.C., and we need to, convention states can do something about that.
There's a group called Citizens Against Government Waste that puts out a pork report every year.
Oh, goodness.
And, I'm sure the military is part of that, but as you all recall, the $400 toilet seats and the $800 hammers or whatever it was,
Yeah.
that's just a small example of what goes on and the duplication of effort within the federal government.
Right.
With regard to the military, it was interesting several years ago, some of you may remember this, we did a base realignment and closure procedure, and that was extremely successful, and it was the only way that they could close a lot of these unneeded, unused military bases. They were just, the military didn't want the bases,
Wow.
but Congress would not allow them to close them without this base realignment and closure commission, which was a nonpartisan commission that studied the whole situation and recommended these bases be closed. And Congress had no choice but to vote yes or vote no on their recommendation. So that worked out really well, and I think, frankly, the whole government needs to go through a realignment and closure because there are so many things that are duplicated. We can argue about what we want to do as a country. We can argue about the priorities of spending for the federal government, but as long as we're wasting as much through duplication and who knows what else, it won't happen. We won't be able to accomplish what we want to accomplish, and we certainly won't be able to pay down the debt.
Dominic, I was thinking when he was talking about the debt, your child's 1 year old?
He's one, yeah. So, I mean, it definitely gives me a completely different perspective on the impact that I'm having on the future for him.
$50,000 in debt he is right now at 1 year old. So we're trying to get the word out to people to get them back involved with their local assembly person, local senator, congressional people. Bring them back into be the originals that our founding fathers thought we would. We wouldn't let our freedom go away. We would be too intelligent to have that happen. So I say to the average person, please get back involved. Research, know what's going on.
People come up to us all the time. It's become popular to say, thank you for your service, right?
Right.
How many times have you heard that?
Yes, many
And
times.
my most recent response is, well, I appreciate that, but do you know that you can serve just as much as we can, and just as much as we did? The average citizen needs to understand that to preserve our liberty, it's not just the people in the military in charge of that, it's every single one of us. All of us need to pay attention to what's going on and you know, realize that this freedom, this liberty that we have isn't in our DNA, it's not in our bloodstream. We have to fight for it. All of us have to fight for it. And it's not just against all enemies foreign, it's all enemies foreign and domestic. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. And that's all we're trying to do. We just want to have a meeting. That's all we want to do. And it's frustrating as, you know what, to me, to realize that there are individuals in these state legislatures who are blocking our request to have a meeting.
You know, earlier you had mentioned that there were these 3 areas that you were proposing, but I'd love to know more about what falls under those areas. Are those the 3 that are set in stone? Tell me a little bit more about that, because I'd love to know how people can get involved.
Right. The 3 areas that we've come up with for a possible convention allow us to propose multiple amendments. And so possible amendments that the people could see come forward could be things such as a balanced budget amendment. You could place not only spending limits on the federal government, but taxing limits as well. When it comes to the second subject, which is reining in the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, you could see certain agencies reined in. We're looking at, you know, like the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause. Those kinds of things have been reinterpreted so much by the Supreme Court that we might want to rein in some federal agencies that have basically taken over state functions and hand those back to the states where they belong. You know, and there's really a wide range of amendments that we could have. There's one that I really like is the potential for reining in the use of executive orders by the president. And regardless of party, the office of the president putting out executive orders has really gotten out of control, and we've seen that and the effect that it can have, and it's effectively lawmaking, and it's not really, it should not be that way. Some other amendments have been discussed in many forums. Is oh gosh, there's so many. An amendment that would basically prevent any international law from, you know, trumping our Constitution as domestic law. Really, the Constitution is supposed to be the supreme law of the land, and we've allowed a lot of interpretations of our, you know, and treaties to creep in and usurp our constitutional rights, and so things like that. What else?
It sounds like, though, if I can just make sure I'm understanding it, if people were passionate about an area, as long as it would fall under one of the 3 restraints and areas that you've already put into the like proposal, or what is it that you're
application.
Thank you. As long as it falls within that, somebody could be very passionate about one area of that, and that's something that they could really get behind and really try to support.
Right. One big one is many people are talking about term limits for the Supreme Court.
Oh, right.
Or federal judges. So that it allows for that. It allows for not only term limits just for Congress, but also for any federal official. So that's why it has it in there. It gives us a little more latitude to present more than just one amendment, but it does have to stay within reining in the power and jurisdiction of the federal government.
And speaking of that, when you talk about illegitimate lawmaking by the president or anybody else, I didn't know this until recently. I suspected it, but it turns out that if you investigate this, you'll find that thousands and thousands of regulations are being promulgated, that's a nice military word, by thousands and thousands of unelected bureaucrats. And these regulations have fines attached to them, and they have basically the full force of law without Congress having anything to do with them.
The average citizen, if you will, maybe feels so much is out of their control at this point that they do start to glass over, and they start to just it's so overwhelming that then you don't even try to get involved at all. And so maybe, like you're saying, you know, we do still have, you know, power, and also a responsibility to take our government and our freedoms very seriously. And
I think Dominique is starting to get our point.
My goal was like, I better really understand this by the end of today.
Sign her up.
Can you raise your right hand?
Yeah, we got more show. Okay, so, but if you were to describe what is really the goal? I mean, I think Ron touched on it quite a bit just now. But Clayton, what would be the goal of the Convention of States project?
Representation is what this is all about, and it's not necessarily what is being decided, it's who is getting to make those decisions.
Right.
And what we're looking to do, our resolution specifically, what we're looking to do, our resolution that we're looking to get 34 states, is to pass a resolution that states, quote, to place fiscal restraints upon the federal government, to rein in the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and to place term limits on federal officials and members of Congress. Those three topics are what we are seeking in the Convention of States. And
so those three areas are really where you're focusing.
Yes, and it's unique because it's not just a single amendment like many of the previous attempts have been made in our country's history. We've had over 400 applications for Article 5 conventions in our country's history, and not one of them, unfortunately, has yet been able to trigger a convention. Ours is unique in the sense that it allows us, or it will allow us, to propose multiple amendments, because we now seek, we're now seeing, we're at a point in history that all three branches are out of control. And so we see the need to be able to address all three branches of the federal government. And so that's why we have a little bit broader, more than one amendment is what we're seeking. We're seeking, three different, topics.
I feel a deep responsibility for our brothers in arms, our sisters in arms who have given their lives, and that's very recent in the case of the Desert Wars, and the Afghanistan wars. We have a responsibility, all of us, not just the veterans, but all of us in this country have a responsibility to get control of the federal government. And everybody's excited about this election, but does anybody really think that no matter who we elect president or Senate, Congress, is that really going to make a difference? Unfortunately, I don't think it will. I think the establishment is in place, and they're going to keep on doing what they've been doing for the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah, that leads me to a couple questions, some points that you guys brought up. But being an election year, I mean, is there any strategy behind that? Do you think it's good that it's an election year, that you guys are really trying to gather this support? Do you think that it's important to do during an election year? Tell me more about that aspect.
As a volunteer on the street, it somewhat distracts, unless you have, and all but one of the presidential candidates have spoken out when addressed about Convention of States and said yes. Some have spoken out very strongly. Currently, I could say Governor Abbott's our biggest campaign pusher, if you would, for our cause in Texas, because he is a practicing, or was a practicing attorney, and he has going to the people, and his state legislature meets twice every 2 years. So he's come out with a book and said, I'm pushing this the next year, 2017. Wow. But when I talk to people on the street, and when I make phone calls, and when people come into our website and I communicate with them, they're thinking that the election's going to save them. And I have to say to them, would you look at how we got here? It didn't just happen in this president or the last president or the last president. It's been coming since the beginning. Colonel Mason happened to be a military man. He's the one that stood up 2 days before the convention was actually ratified and said, wait a minute, we've got a provision in here for Congress to amend the Constitution, but not the people. And he got it put in. And they said, our founding fathers at that time, there's going to come a time. Well, I look around today, and as I talk to the people that I talk to, yes, vote, yes, search out the person that represents you best and has your values. But when it comes to this government, we have to rein the government back. It's a government by the people. And if you'll see state propositions, even in our state in California, we the people say, yes, we want this. Supreme Court says, nope, sorry. We're the ultimate, we're the supreme, and it was never designed to be that way.
Interesting. Yes, of course.
Back this statement up, I believe the structure of our government is broken, and the Convention of States project, we're dedicated to fixing that structure with amendments.
Yeah, he's exactly right. It's a structural problem. That is really the fundamental point here. Is it's a fundamental structural problem in government, and even like you're talking about the elections that are going on right now, and former Senator Tom Coburn is now an active campaigner for the Convention of States. He spent years in the United States Senate, and he came out and said, "There's nothing you can do.
Wow.
There is nothing that can be done to change the system now from within. It cannot be done," and that's why he is also convinced of this. He's on board. He's been campaigning across the country with Mark Meckler and Michael Ferris.
That's scary.
I have a
Right,
metaphor.
I mean, absolutely, that's really scary.
Yeah, I have a metaphor for what you're talking about in terms of structure. The Constitution gave us a tremendous foundation and a tremendous structure to build the greatest country on earth. We all believe that. But I have a background in real estate, and here in Santa Barbara we've got all sorts of beautiful Victorian homes with wonderful structures on them. But if you walk into them, some of them, a lot of them, they're not that impressive. They stink. Kind of like where we are now with the federal government.
I like this comparison.
You know, they got dry rot, they got mold, they got mildew, but the structure's still there and the beauty is still there. But they need to be remodeled.
Right.
And essentially that's what we're calling for. All we want is to have a meeting. Maybe nothing will come of it. Maybe we won't be able to agree on anything. If we do agree on something, it'll require 38 states to ratify any amendment that we propose.
And that meaning the vote would go to whom in the states? Who would be ratifying?
Each state is a little bit different, but it comes back to one state, one vote. If California says, yes, we're going to do it, and we're having our first day on Tuesday before the Assembly, actually the Judiciary Committee, if the state of California says, yes, we want to do that, and 34 states say, yep, they're going to do it, then each state decides how they get their delegates together. We could be delegates. We're not qualified probably, but we could be. Anybody could be.
Down, you know?
So the situation goes when you go for this meeting, and that's all it is a meeting. 34 states go, one state, one vote. That's written 200 years ago. Article 5 puts that out. So there's a fear. They say, oh no, this will be a a constitutional convention to rewrite the Constitution. No, it's not. It's a meeting, much like if we share water in California.
Right.
We had an Article 5 convention of regional states that came together, all that touched the river, and said, we're going to get together and decide how we're going to share that water. That was an Article 5 convention. People don't realize that, but it was just what they knew. It's a meeting of the states. Every one of those states had one state, one vote, but I'm sure the people in Santa Barbara had a different idea about the amount of water that they wanted than did in Arizona. But it came back to the states. They all ratified it, and now we have water from the Colorado River. It works.
Right.
Yeah. That's another thing that's important to point out is there is a long history of conventions prior to and shortly following the 1787 Constitutional Convention. There were approximately 32 conventions leading up to 1787 and then beyond. They were not, obviously they were not under Article 5 per se, because the Constitution was not in existence yet. But those conventions were the precedent and the basis of Article 5. The founders had experience with conventions that dealt with specific problems, be they regional issues or defense issues, economic issues, and in many cases they also dealt with ineffective governing bodies, and they would reject regional governors. These conventions were very well known. The rules and procedures they were accustomed to them. Generations of Englishmen and American used these types of conventions to deal with specific problems over time. And that's exactly why they put Article 5 in there. They were familiar with these types of conventions. They were problem-solving conventions is what they were. And so
Like that, problem solving? Yeah.
Exactly. And so when
What a
That's
concept.
a catchy way
That's a
to
good
explain
one.
it to
Yes.
someone, actually.
Yeah, and so when 2/3 of the states are required to come together, they set the agenda for the convention by passing that application language. That is the agenda, and it cannot get, out of control, or as Fred put it, they cannot have a runaway convention. It's just not possible because there's too many legal and mathematical restraints on a runaway convention or a runaway amendment. Just the bar is set so high to pass any kind of amendment. And that's the one thing I want to go back to is the convention that we're proposing right now, or we're trying to get, is simply a proposing convention.
Right. It does not guarantee anything.
It does not guarantee anything. It is simply to come up with recommendations to the states. And once those recommendations are made, they're put out to the states. And then there's an even higher bar, 3/4 of the states, or 38. And what I like to emphasize in my presentations is 38 states times 2 legislative bodies, that's 76 legislative chambers have to pass each and every amendment if they want to ratify it. So that's a very high bar. So we're not talking,
Yeah, it's unbelievable to me that some people are afraid of that. What I'm afraid of is what's going on now. If we continue to go down the path we're going down, it's not good.
We have a runaway convention right now,
Right.
because effectively what we've all seen is Congress, the Office of the President, and the Supreme Court have, over time, reinterpreted the Constitution and taken advantage of, unfortunately, kind of vague language. So over time, they have run away with it and they have reinterpreted it. And all we're looking to do is bring it back to its original meaning.
And maybe something you touched on, that when they wrote it into the Constitution, that was because it was, rather common or ununderstood practice. And so do you think that because it's just been so long since the current citizens have seen or heard of something like this, they're just a little bit, people fear the unknown and it seems scary. This is our government and you're trying to change things. So do you think that, what is it that they're afraid of happening?
I think go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, the history, like many parts of our history in our schools, have been taken out. The history of Article 5 has been basically hidden for a very long time. There are what's known right now are 3 phases, or 3 paradigms of historical writings about Article 5 of the Constitution. The first phase was in the 60s and 70s, and it was only based on very small snippets of the Constitutional Convention and the Federalist Papers, and there was no mention whatsoever of any kind of convention prior to that. So it was as if our country has only had one convention in our entire nation's history, and that's simply not the fact.
Interesting.
There's been 30-something conventions. And so the second phase of historical research that was done was between 1970 and basically 2000. And so that body of evidence brought out a little bit more, actually quite a bit more evidence. And the researchers did mention prior conventions, but they didn't discuss it in depth. But they were still uncomfortable with the notion because it had never been done. And so they still concluded that we're still not real sure about it. Well, the latest body of evidence that's been uncovered were the full documentation of all 30-some conventions that took place in our country's history. And they were researched in depth by a number of leading national Article 5 historical experts. And one of those who is with the Convention of States is Professor Robert G. Nadelson. And their research basically brought out all of the facts, and they concluded that, yes, an Article 5 convention this is what the founders intended this to be, a limited problem-solving convention, and that they can do this. And so this is what this is about. It was well established and well understood in our history, but that history is just now being brought back now. We're just now being re-enlightened to that, and that's what we're trying to do, is re-educate our legislators and the people on what Article 5 is, and this most powerful tool that we have to counter the federal government.
We had a mock convention last year, as I recall, in Florida.
Oh, wow.
Just kind of a dry run.
Yeah, and how did
it
it
went
go?
great.
Really?
Yeah. And I think they're planning on another one, but I don't know when that is.
There's what's called the Convention of States Caucus, and there are a group of legislators from across the country who have joined the caucus, and they're preparing to hold another simulated convention this summer. It's not been lined out yet, but yeah, they're planning to do just that.
Why are veterans seeming to get involved with this Convention of States? Why do you think there's that connection?
I think it's because most of us have traveled extensively throughout the country and throughout the world, and we know how other people work. We know what it's like to live in poverty and destitution, and what it's like to live under a dictatorship, and you name it, every circumstance you can imagine. That's one thing. The other thing has already been spoken of, and that's our defense of the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And once that's in your blood, you realize that there are things more important than me, me, me. You continue to feel that way, and I've seen that ever since I got off active duty. The people who lead the service clubs, the people who run for local office are very often ex-military people, because it's not all about them, it's about their community, it's about their friends, their neighbors, and their country. And that's why we're here. We're all volunteers. We don't get paid a dime to be involved with Convention of States. I don't think so. Do you guys get paid anything?
Not lately.
If you do, can you let me know how to sign up?
And in that same vein, and going back to you and being a family member, used to be dependent, but family member.
That's right now.
My wife and daughter traveled around the world with me. We spent 9 years in Germany. And in that 9 years, a lot of things happened. But the wall was up. And for my daughter, it would be telling her or taking my family members to the wall, and we couldn't go within 3 kilometers of the fence. And then explaining to people that we weren't keeping them out. They were keeping their citizens in. So when President Reagan did what he did, tear down this wall, it was, nobody thought it was possible. But he had the support of the person. He spoke with us. He told us what we were doing. We kind of lost that conversation. We have secret things going on now that people just don't know about, and agreements being made and treaties being made that the Congress don't even know about. How come? You know, who's allowing that to happen? We the people are. So what we veterans say, if you've sworn your life to defend your country, by gosh, I'm still living, and I got a lot of work to do.
As young officers, when we signed on to serve active duty, now we're veterans, and I think that tradition of serving has just been ingrained within us.
I
agree.
agree with that. I can see that.
Yeah, it's just an awareness.
Yeah.
A much greater awareness,
Yeah.
like Ron was saying. It's just an awareness of what's going on around us, what our country is like compared to other countries, and our citizens are not aware, and they need to be, they need to be kind of brought back and woken up, and get involved is what needs to happen, because if we don't get involved, then we're in serious trouble.
What we have is wonderful, but it's very fragile. It requires maintenance.
Just like the home,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's all we're asking for, is the opportunity to do some maintenance on it and make it more efficient, so that we can all get what we want without bankrupting our grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned some support on a national scale through different elected officials. Who supports this?
I'd say overall, this is really like Ron's been saying as well, it's a nonpartisan issue. It doesn't really matter what political affiliation any of us has anymore. Everything that's coming out of Washington, D.C. is affecting us as individuals, regardless of our affiliation. And you can see people of any political color getting very frustrated about what's going on in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And so we see it, you know, we're, even here in California, we've had an Article 5 resolution was actually passed in 2014. I learned of it shortly after I became the state director, and we looked it up, and a Democrat by the name of Mike Gatto in California's District 43 introduced an Article 5 resolution in 2014, I believe it was June, and they passed it in both the Assembly and the Senate in California. So we have already passed an Article 5 resolution in California.
Do you know what the resolution was?
It was regarding campaign finance reform in a nutshell.
Oh, that's good.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, right? Yeah, as you actually were touching on earlier. So
yeah, so it had to do with a Supreme Court ruling, I believe, that they're looking to overturn. But the bottom line is they've passed an Article 5 resolution. They understand that it can be limited in nature as far as the convention goes, and it's one of those. It's just another Article 5 resolution, and so we're just looking for a different flavor of the same thing. Really, we're just seeking a broader convention that will allow us to address all three branches of the federal government, because now it's just completely out of control, and. We're looking, we're not even talking about us
I don't know that
anymore.
it's out of control. It's in control, but it's not in our control.
Right.
There you go.
It's
Exactly.
in control.
In somebody's control.
It's
right?
in control of the establishment on both sides of the aisle. is what it
Right.
is.
Exactly.
And they like it the way it is.
Exactly.
Right.
And what we're talking about, though, now is not ourselves. We're talking about our children and our grandchildren. We're talking about future generations of Americans. That's really what it boils down to.
That is one thing that I would love to learn more about, is actually what you just said about it's in someone's control but not ours. But so don't we need the people that are in office to support this, that might take some
Unfortunately,
control out of
we
their
do, and that's,
hands? I mean, so that's, I feel like, for the people who are kind of that career politician, that's going to be a difficult sell for them, right? I mean, why?
Well, the good news is we don't need Congress's approval to do this. The U.S. Congresses. What we do need are these resolutions passed by the individual state legislatures.
So that's where that hope
And
could come in. Okay, that's good.
For whatever reason, we have 6 states that have passed the resolution, but we'd have at least, 6 or 10 more if we didn't have single individuals in each state blocking.
Wow.
Through spurious political shenanigans, basically.
We do have people from all different parties involved in the Convention of States.
That's good.
You have Republicans, you have Democrats, you have Libertarians. I've been getting calls from across the state from all kinds of people that are interested in because they're concerned. They're concerned about what's going on in Washington. And what we're looking to do, though, you mentioned, how we could do this. The state legislatures have to do it on our behalf. And what we're counting on, though, is it's difficult to get legislators to do things, but our education process of our legislatures is working. In the first year, we had only 3 states pass it, and then we took huge losses. And then the second year, we had 1 more state, Alabama, pass it. But then the margins of loss became razor thin. We had a lot of states pass it in one chamber, one of their 2 chambers. And like Ron said, it's in a lot of cases now, it's one person standing in the way now. So we're making a lot of progress behind the scenes. And what we're counting on in the big picture is that state legislatures, they are their own sovereign government in a sense. And we know that centers of power only do one thing. They crave and desire more power.
That could be a good motivation for them.
What we are
then,
doing
right?
conceptually is pitting 50 centers of power, 50 states, against the federal government and saying, look, you hold the cards here in Article 5. You can hold a convention and take back what was taken from you. And so that's what we're counting on, and that's what the states are starting to wake up to, is they're starting to realize they actually hold the power, a unilateral power in Article 5 to completely bypass them and take it back and bring it back to the state capitals. And that's what we're hoping will happen.
So you currently have 6, correct? And in what year did they start?
Fall,
this
the
process?
late 2013 is when they began.
Wow, so it's actually, heck, I work for the government, so I can say this, but in government time, that's not too shabby, actually.
Right.
You know, that's not even 3 years. So,
Yeah.
okay. So that's, well, congratulations on that.
Yeah,
That's great.
So, you know, and you've had, obviously 6 states have passed, and you've had at least 37 or 38 states introduce it for consideration, including California, obviously.
Wow.
And so you have far more than 40 states in total who have taken some form of action toward reaching that 34 state goal. And it's just incredible the movement that's taking place though now. So it's really gaining a lot of momentum behind the scenes, just people just don't quite see it yet. But it's
What do we
coming.
have, over 20,000 supporters in California?
Yeah, in California we have well over 25,000 supporters statewide. We have, I believe it's closer to 30,000, and I think the petition signers, those who have signed petitions, is over 25,000 now. And so you have an average of about 300, roughly 300 per assembly district in California. So there's a lot of people that are starting to get on board and realize that this is something that needs to be done.